A wind howled through the high steel towers of Zyphera, carrying with it the scent of ozone and rain. From her laboratory, perched on the highest plateau of the city, Inakha stared at the storm rolling across the sky, the clouds thick with something more than just impending rain. A storm of another kind was brewing within her mind. She turned from the window, her reflection in the glass shifting with the dim blue glow of the monitors that lined the walls. Her lab was the heart of Zyphera's most ambitious project, the Quantum Nexus Initiative. For years, they had worked toward a singular goal: to harness energy from parallel realities, a limitless source that could end the city's reliance on dwindling resources. It was the solution to every problem, the key to survival. And now it was ready. Inakha, a voice cut through the hum of machinery. Dr. Kalen stood at the entrance, his expression shadowed with something beyond exhaustion. The council is pressuring us for an answer. They want to proceed. She had known this moment would come, yet her stomach tightened. We haven't run all the ethical simulations. We both know the council doesn't care about ethics. They want results. Kalen stepped closer, lowering his voice. The numbers are solid, but the unknowns, he exhaled sharply. You've seen the potential ripple effects. Pulling energy from alternate dimensions. It's not as simple as they want to believe. We don't know what we're disturbing. She did know. In the simulations, minor fractures had appeared between realities, small, almost imperceptible at first. But if left unchecked, they could expand into something far worse. Yet the pressure was immense. The city's core energy grid was failing. Within months, blackouts would begin, and with them chaos. The council had made it clear. They needed the project to succeed, no matter the risks. She turned back to the control panel, fingers grazing the smooth glass. What if we stabilize the rift as we extract? We don't even know if the rift will remain stable, Kalen countered. And if it doesn't, we're talking about a fundamental breakdown of the dimensional barrier. If you flip that switch, Inakha, you're making a choice that can't be undone. She clenched her jaw. She had dedicated her entire life to this project. She had sacrificed friendships, love, even a part of herself. Walking away now, it felt like betrayal, not just to the council, but to her own convictions. A sharp chime interrupted them. The lab's main console flickered, and a voice crackled over the intercom. Dr. Inakha, the council requests your presence in the chamber. Kalen met her gaze. You don't have to do this. She hesitated, then turned, her answer unspoken but understood. The council chamber was a vast, circular hall, its walls embedded with shifting holographic displays that pulsed with streams of data. Seated before her were the decision-makers of Zyphera, their faces illuminated by the cold glow of the information scrolling past them. Inakha, Counselor Varos began, his voice smooth, practiced. Your research is revolutionary, but we need to move beyond theory. We need action. The risks are secondary, Varos interrupted. We are running out of time. You understand this better than anyone. She stole a glance at the others. They were watching her, waiting. The weight of expectations settled onto her shoulders. You have the authority to proceed, Varos continued, leaning forward. We trust your judgment. It was a lie. They trusted results, not her judgment. Still, she nodded. She had known all along that hesitation was never truly an option. Back in the lab, Kalen stood by the terminal, his arms crossed. You've decided? There was never a choice, she murmured. Kalen exhaled through his nose, but said nothing. He moved to the secondary controls. Then let's at least try to contain the damage. She positioned herself before the central console. The Nexus core pulsed in its containment field, a swirling vortex of untested power. Data streams confirmed stability, at least for now. Her fingers hovered over the activation sequence. A final moment stretched between hesitation and certainty. Somewhere deep inside, something screamed at her to stop. She pressed the key. A tremor passed through the lab, followed by a low, resonant hum. The core expanded, a spiraling blue sphere swallowing the darkness. At first, it was beautiful, a perfect synchronization of science and ambition. Then something shifted. The hum became a shudder. The walls flickered, light bending in ways it shouldn't. The containment field faltered. Monitors surged with unreadable data, flashing warnings in red. Inakha. Kaylin's voice barely cut through the rising noise. Shut it down. She scrambled for the override, but the system was unresponsive. The energy twisted, spiraling outward, distorting the very air around them. Through the glass, she saw the city below, the towers shimmering, shifting. Her breath hitched. Buildings flickered between different versions of themselves, some taller, some ruined, some entirely gone. The sky fractured, splitting into layers of impossible colors. A figure appeared in the lab, a reflection of herself. But not a reflection. It moved independently, its eyes hollow with something beyond recognition. She stumbled back. No! The figure raised a hand, its lips parting as if to speak. Then reality shattered. The world convulsed. A deafening crack split through the lab as light fractured into jagged shards, folding over itself in ways that defied sense. Inakha's breath hitched as gravity wavered beneath her feet, a sickening lurch that sent her staggering into the console. The monitors flickered between reality and something else. Glimpses of places that shouldn't exist, landscapes shifting, skies burning, oceans floating in the void. A scream echoed from somewhere behind her. Kaylin! She twisted around just in time to see him collapse, his form flickering as though he were being pulled between states of existence. For a moment he was solid whole. Then he wasn't. His face twisted in pain, his hands grasping at nothing as if fighting against unseen forces trying to unravel him. Inakha! His voice strained, distorted, as if spoken from two places at once. She lunged toward him, but the space between them stretched impossibly, the distance warping. The lab itself buckled, walls folding in on themselves, breaking apart into unfamiliar corridors that shouldn't have been there. Then silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something vast and hollow, pressing into her skull. The storm outside had ceased, yet the world beyond the lab was unrecognizable. Zyphra was no longer the city she had known. Buildings shimmered with uncertainty, their structures shifting between states, some standing tall, others reduced to skeletal remains of metal and glass. Roads fractured, twisting in unnatural spirals. The sky had darkened to an abyssal hue, streaked with unfamiliar constellations that flickered in and out of existence. She forced herself to move, her legs heavy as though reality itself resisted her presence. Stepping over the remnants of shattered equipment, she reached for the console, desperate to make sense of what she had done. The data was incomprehensible, a flood of symbols, patterns that shifted before her eyes, mocking her attempt at understanding. The Nexus core pulsed erratically in its containment field, unstable, its light dimming. Whatever had happened, whatever breach she had caused, it was not over. A movement in the reflection of the screen made her freeze. Not her own. Slowly, she turned. A figure stood in the doorway. It was her, but not. The other Inakha was wrong in ways that sent a cold tendril of fear crawling up her spine. Her doppelganger's features were slightly off. Eyes too dark, skin too smooth, an almost perfect imitation, yet empty. She did not blink, did not breathe. Inakha, the voice was hers, yet it carried an echo, a whisper layered beneath it. She stepped back instinctively, but the figure mirrored her perfectly, an unnatural symmetry that set her teeth on edge. What are you? The question barely made it past her lips. The thing that wore her face tilted its head, almost as if considering the question. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it raised a hand, and the world split again. Pain lanced through her skull, a kaleidoscope of fractured images flooding her mind. Worlds collapsing, screaming voices, endless variations of herself caught in the same moment of decision. Some had succeeded, some had failed, some had never existed at all. She hit the ground hard, the impact jarring the visions away. When she looked up, the figure was gone. Kaylin. She forced herself to move, scanning the ruined lab for any sign of him. The space was still shifting, the walls now overgrown with creeping veins of something metallic and alive. The air felt denser, filled with whispers that slithered at the edge of perception. A groan. Her heart leaped. She found him near the core, his body partially transparent, flickering between solidity and something less certain. His breaths were ragged, his hands gripping the floor as if anchoring himself. She dropped to her knees beside him. "Kalen, stay with me." He forced his eyes open, the strain evident in every muscle. What happened? Guilt crashed over her like a tidal wave. "I don't know. The breach, it's worse than we thought. The city," she swallowed hard. "Reality is breaking apart." His expression darkened. "I told you it wasn't stable." "I know." The words barely carried weight against the enormity of her mistake. A deep rumble shook the ground beneath them. Outside, the city twisted further, its very foundation warping. In the distance, dark shapes moved, figures that should not exist, slipping through the fractures between realities. Watching, Kalen coughed, struggling to sit up. "We have to stop this." She nodded, though she had no idea how. Then, the console beeped weakly, drawing her attention. The data stream had stabilized slightly, displaying a single, urgent message. "Primary containment failed. Secondary protocol available, ****. A pulse of hope. There was still a chance. Kalen followed her gaze, his expression hardening. "Is it a reversal?" She scanned the data. A failsafe. A way to seal the breach. But she hesitated. The instructions were clear. Activating it would stabilize the rupture, but at a cost. A reset, not just of the Nexus, but of everything tied to it, including them. Kalen saw the hesitation in her eyes. "We don't have a choice." She clenched her fists. He was right. The world was unraveling by the second. But the weight of her decision pressed down on her, heavier than before. She had made a mistake. Now, she had to decide if she was willing to erase it, or if she was willing to erase herself. The air vibrated with an unnatural hum, the remnants of reality fraying at the edges. Inakha steadied herself against the ruined console, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The message on the screen pulsed with quiet urgency, a singular directive flashing in stark white against the chaos unraveling around her. The failsafe was her last chance, but the cost lingered in the back of her mind, heavy and absolute. Kalen shifted beside her, his form still flickering, barely tethered to this reality. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes remained sharp, locked onto the screen. "If we do this," he rasped, "we reset everything." Do we even know what that means? No, they didn't. The failsafe was designed as an emergency containment measure, but its implications stretched beyond the confines of a simple shutdown. If activated, it would not just close the rupture, it would overwrite the very moment the Nexus had torn the fabric of reality apart. A hard reset, erasing the cascade of consequences that had followed. But would it return everything to normal? Or would it rewrite the world in ways she couldn't predict? Her fingers hovered over the interface. The distant cityscape was barely recognizable now, shifting between structures both ancient and impossibly futuristic. Figures moved in the periphery of her vision, distorted reflections of people that did not belong here. Some looked like versions of herself. Others were strangers who should not exist at all. A deep tremor shook the lab, the Nexus core's containment field flickering erratically. The rupture was expanding. Time was running out. Kalen's voice was strained, but steady. "Whatever happens, we fix this. We have to." She nodded, though uncertainty clawed at her resolve. "If we reset the timeline, we won't remember any of this." "Good." His faint smirk was a shadow of its usual self. "Then we won't make the same mistake again." A sharp breath. She forced herself to focus. The failsafe required 2 activations. One from her terminal, one from the manual override in the core chamber. A safeguard against accidental deployment. She would have to enter the rift itself to trigger it. Another quake rattled the facility. The sky beyond had deepened into something resembling an open wound, its colors bleeding into each other, devouring what little remained of the familiar. She couldn't hesitate any longer. Pushing herself upright, she met Kalen's gaze. "Stay here. If something goes wrong, you shut it down from here." "Inakha, please." Her voice wavered, but she held firm. If this doesn't work, at least one of us has to make it out. He looked as if he wanted to argue, but another tremor forced his silence. With a reluctant nod, he turned back to the console, hands bracing against the flickering controls. She didn't waste another second. The corridor leading to the core chamber was unrecognizable. Shadows twisted unnaturally along the walls, stretching toward her like grasping fingers. The air was thick with distortion, time itself bleeding into fractured moments. She could hear echoes of her own voice, whispers of decisions made and unmade, possibilities unraveling in parallel threads. Her footsteps barely made a sound against the shifting floor. The chamber door stood ajar, light spilling from within in unnatural pulses. The Nexus core hovered at the center, its once contained energy now a barely held chaos, the rift swirling within its heart like a vortex of unmade reality. She hesitated at the threshold. A figure stood near the core. Herself, not the hollow-eyed imitation from before. This one felt real, solid, steady, their gazes locked across the impossible divide. "You shouldn't be here," the other Inakha said, voice steady but laced with something unreadable. "Neither should you," she countered. The other version of herself studied her for a long moment, then nodded as if reaching an understanding neither of them could articulate. "Then let's end this." She moved first, stepping aside to reveal the failsafe override. A mirrored action, synchronized as though it had always been meant to happen this way. Inakha approached, every nerve in her body screaming against the unknown. The interface beneath her hands was cold, unyielding. One final sequence. One last decision. She looked up. The other Inakha gave the smallest of nods. They pressed the command together. The world shattered. A flood of light. A sensation of falling without moving. The universe collapsing inward and expanding outward all at once. Every fragment of possibility unraveling, reweaving, merging into a singular moment. And then, stillness. A soft wind. The scent of rain. Inakha's eyes fluttered open. She was standing at the observation window of her lab, the storm outside rolling over the city just as it always had. The monitors hummed softly, their glow familiar, steady. No warnings. No anomalies. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She turned. Kalen stood by the console, flipping through data as if nothing had happened. He glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "You okay?" You spaced out for a second. Her lips parted, but the words didn't come. Everything was normal. The Nexus core, secure within its containment. The world, unchanged. Except a flicker of something in the reflection of the glass. A shadow, a figure that was there, and then gone in the span of a heartbeat. A whisper, just at the edge of hearing. She closed her eyes. A deep breath. Somewhere in some version of reality, she had made a different choice. But here now, she had been given another chance. And this time, she would not waste it.